Hello everyone, how's it going? In this video we will talk about constructors in Kotlin. So we will talk about primary constructors and secondary constructors. So let's have a brief introduction about constructors. A constructor is a special member function and that is called when an object is instantiated or created. So we can say that a constructor is a special member function that is invoked when an object of the class is created. And it is primarily used to initialize variables or properties. We can also say that a constructor is responsible for object creation. In Kotlin, we have two types of constructors. So we have a primary constructor and we have a secondary constructor. So let's talk about the primary constructor. The primary constructor is the part of the class header. It goes after the class name. So we have discussed about classes and the class header in the previous video. So if you're not familiar with that, do check that out. So let's define a class to understand the concept of primary constructor. So I'm going to create a class called person, and here we can have the set of parentheses followed by the class name. And to declare a constructor, we type the constructor keyword here. And a constructor can have optional type parameter. So I'm going to pass first name in here. So var first name, and this will be of type string. And we can also define a multiple type parameters, for example age, and it will be an integer. And then we have the class body right here. So that's how we define a primary constructor. So here we can see the block of code that is surrounded by parentheses. So that's the primary constructor. And the constructor declared two properties: first name, which will be of type string, and age, which will be of type integer. And both of these properties are read-write properties. So one thing to note is that these properties that we have declared in the constructor, these behaves the same way as regular variables. Alright, so let us now create an object of this class. So I'm going to call this one person. Let's call this person1. This will be of type person, and let's set this equal to person. So here we are calling the constructor, and let's pass the values. So for the first name I'm going to pass Joe, and for the age let's pass 22. Let's print the value of first name and age on the console. So I'm going to call a println function, and let's pass in person1, and let's access the first name property, and in a similar fashion let's access the age property. So let's run the program and let's see what do we get in the output below. So our program is up and running, and here we can see we have Joe and 22 printed in the output window. So let's understand what is happening here. So when we created the constructor, we declared two properties, first name and age. And when the object of person class is created on line number 3, Joe and 22 values are passed as if a person is a function. As you can see, we are calling the person constructor just like a normal function. So this initializes the first name and age properties of person object to Joe and 22 respectively. And since the properties are initialized, we can access these properties using the dot notation on the person object, like we are doing on line number 4 and 5. One important thing to note is that we cannot omit the type of field in the primary constructor. So this should be explicit, like we cannot remove this string property here. And if we remove the string type, we get an error saying that parameters type must have a type annotation. So that means we have to provide the type of the argument that we are receiving in the constructor. If the primary constructor does not have any annotations or visibility modifiers, the constructor keyword can be omitted. Like we can remove this. So this will work fine. And another thing to note is that the primary constructor cannot contain any code. So we cannot have a code block here. initialization code can be placed in an initializer block, which are prefixed with the init keyword. So we cannot have any code inside the constructor, we can just receive arguments. So to put the initialization code, initializer block is used, and it is prefixed with init keyword. So let's go ahead and define one. So instead of initializing the properties right here, I'm going to remove this var keyword. It means we are not declaring the properties. So we will declare these just as a normal class variables. So I'm going to type first name. This will be of type string, and I'm going to type age, and this will be of type int. And it should be var. So we get an error that property must be initialized or be abstract. So we are going to create an initializer block, and to create an initializer block we start with the init keyword, init, then we will open a set of curly braces, and inside this block we will provide the initialization for these variables. So first name will be equal to the first name that we receive in the constructor. So first name, let's call this dot first name is equal to first name, and this dot age is equal to age. So since we are having the same variable names, we are using the this keyword, which refers the current object. So now the question is when an initializer block is called. The initializer block is called after the primary constructor. So sometimes we have to execute some initialization code, and init block is a great place to do that. We can also access class fields in initializer block. So for example, we can call a println function here, and we can access the class fields for like first name and age. So by using this keyword, we'll be referring to these fields right here. And we are going to remove this from here. So let's go ahead and run our program, and let's see what we get in the output. So here we can see we have the same output as before. We get Joe and 22 printed in the output window. So that's how we can use an initializer block. So let's walk through this program. So here parameters first name and age inside the parentheses accepts the value Joe and 22 respectively. And when person one object is created, a first name and person age or the age are used without var and val keyword, which means that they are not the properties of this class. And we have defined the properties right here on this line number 7 and 8. When person one object is created, code inside the initializer block is executed. The initializer block not only initializes the properties but also prints them in this case right here. And we are accessing these properties inside the initializer block because we can do that. To distinguish between the constructor parameter and the property, different names are used. So we are using the same name here. So what we can do is we can prefix this with underscore, and we can prefix this with underscore. So this is a common convention to prefix the constructor parameters with underscore. So now we can remove this keyword because our variables have a different name. We can also provide default values in primary constructor. So we can set the first name equal to unknown in the case if the value of first name is not provided, and we can set age equal to, let's say, 0. So let's create another object called person2 and set its type equal to person. And if we do not supply any value for the primary constructor arguments, the default values will be used. So the first name will be equal to unknown and age will be set to 0. So let's comment this line and let's run the program to see the output. So our program is up and running, and we can see we have unknown and 0 printed in the output window. This is because we have not supplied any value to the primary constructor, and we are using the default values that we set here. One more thing to note is that parameters of the primary constructor can be used in the initializer block, so which means that we are using them here. They can also be used in the property initializers declared in the class body, so we can also use them while declaring the class variables. So instead of initializing it here, we'll just initialize when declaring the class variables, like so, and here. So this will also work fine. So that's all for this video, and in the next video we will take a look at secondary constructors.